Most people around my age know one thing about the Oregon Trail, and that's that you're likely to die of dysentery. But it turns out there was so much more to this 2,000+ mile trek west, including the fact that it took 4 to 6 months, and that you'd be having about 500 campfire meals, many of which would have been Johnny cakes and bacon. So thank you to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video as we try not to die of dysentery. This time on Tasting History.
How many
so for those who don't know,
does this guy have?
Oregon Trail was actually a collection of wagon trails that went from Independence, Missouri to Oregon City, Oregon. And from 1846 to 1869, about 400,000 settlers, farmers, miners, ranchers, and their families used it to cross 2,200 miles of prairie, desert, and mountain terrain. Now, it wasn't exactly a single trail, and there were people who would split off to go settle in California or Utah, but in general, for about half of the year, there were wagon trains heading west along a general trail. And the people in those wagons were known as emigrants, and every morning around 4 a.m., they would wake up, start making fires so they could prepare their breakfast. And one of the most common breakfasts was bacon, hoe cakes, or Johnny cakes, which are a corn cake, and coffee. Now, these Johnny cakes were very popular at the time. They had been popular since the 18th century, and they went under a host of names, including hoe cakes, but also Indian meal cakes or Indian corn cakes, which is what the Farmers and Emigrants Complete Guide from 18...
For all of those who aren't me and Joseph, corn back then just meant any type of grain.
1956 calls it. Written by Josiah T. Marshall, it says, take 1 quart of sifted Indian meal, 2 tablespoonfuls of molasses, 2 teaspoonfuls of salt, a bit of shortening, lard or butter, half as big as a hen's egg, stir these together, make it pretty moist with scalding water, put it into a well-greased pan, smooth the surface, and bake it brown on both sides before a quick fire. Now, he does have instructions to make a fancier version that has milk and cinnamon and ginger, but I'm going to make this basic version because I feel like this is what most people would have been eating on most mornings on the Oregon Trail. And frankly, if you need the fancy version, then the Oregon Trail is probably not for you. I would go with something like a meal from today's sponsor, HelloFresh. See, unlike the emigrants on the Oregon Trail who ate a lot of salt pork and hardtack, the ingredients from HelloFresh are just that,
I
fresh.
love the hardtack bit.
They deliver boxes of quality ingredients right to your doorstep so you don't have to go to the grocery stores often, and all of the ingredients are pre-portioned so there's less time spent prepping and more time spent cooking and eating. And with over 45 weekly recipes to choose from, there's plenty of variety and something for everyone, whether you're a vegetarian, pescatarian, or if you're in a hurry, they have a whole lineup of quick and easy meals, which are the ones that I really like, for those nights where you just want to get to eating. Yesterday, I made the crispy maple mustard chicken with roasted potato wedges and carrots. The sauce was wonderfully tangy, and I followed it up with one of HelloFresh's New York-style cheesecakes. So to give HelloFresh a try, just go to HelloFresh.com or use my link in the description and use code TASTINGHISTORYSWEET to get free dessert for life. You get 1 free dessert in every box as long as the subscription is active. That's TASTINGHISTORYSWEET at HelloFresh.com for free dessert for life. I'm sure those people on the Oregon Trail would have really appreciated some free dessert. Alas, at least in the mornings, all they had was Johnny cakes and bacon. They had other things, but to make Johnny cakes and bacon, what you'll need is 2 cups or 300 grams of fine cornmeal, 1 tablespoon of molasses, 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 tablespoons or 30 grams of unsalted butter, and some boiling water. And then you'll also need some...
I don't know why it has to be boiling water. Do you know why that is?
Grease to grease the pan, and the best way to get grease, and probably how they would have done it, is to fry the bacon in that pan. It also should give the Johnny cakes some nice bacony flavor. So first fry up your bacon however you like it, then set it aside but keep the grease in the pan. Then add the molasses, salt, and the butter into the cornmeal, and then work it all in by hand. Then pour some boiling water.
So corn hydrates better in hot water.
In, and using a spoon, start mixing it together. Now, the amount of water that you add is really up to you. For a firmer cake, you're going to add about 3/4 of a cup of water, but you can add a little bit more for a looser cake. He's not super specific in how wet this mixture should be, but he does say that it should be smoothed on the top. So if it's too loose, you won't be able to smooth it. It'll just automatically do it. So I'm guessing it's a little firmer. So form up some round cakes by hand and then heat the grease up and carefully set the cake in. Now, unlike pancakes, which will have little bubbles form on the top that let you know when it's time to flip it,
Corn tortillas are made with boiling water. I didn't know that.
these don't have that, so you kind of just gotta eyeball it. For me, it took about 3 minutes on one side and then 2 minutes on the other side. So obviously, if we're able to make these, we know that the emigrants would have been bringing cornmeal, molasses, bacon, and salt. When it comes to the butter, they would have often brought a milk cow with them, and in the morning they would milk it, put it into a pail, and attach it to the bottom of the wagon. And throughout the day, the jostling of the wagon would actually churn it into butter that they would have that night, some nice fresh butter. But it wasn't all Johnny cakes and bacon for every meal every day. So what else did those pioneers pack up to take with them before shouting, "Wagons! Ho!" So it's the 1850s, and you have just had it with the East Coast. So you're moving west using that newfangled Oregon Trail. So you make your way to Independence, Missouri, where you pack up your covered wagon. Now, these were not the really big covered wagons that were rambling down the streets of
Conestoga wagon. Conestoga? Conestoga? However you say it.
America at the time. No, these were smaller covered wagons known as prairie schooners. And you need to gather up
Prairie schooners? That's hilarious.
4 to 6 months worth of provisions and pack it all into this rather small wagon. Luckily, people who have gone before you have written down general guidelines of what you might need. And when it comes to food, which is what I'm concerned with, for 3 people, they say you should bring about 5 barrels or 1,080 pounds of flour, 600 pounds of bacon, 100 pounds of coffee, 5 pounds of tea.
Not nearly enough tea. Just putting that out there.
150 pounds sugar, 75 of rice, 50 of dried fruit, 50 of salt, pepper, and other seasonings, and 10 pounds of saleratus, or baking soda. Other guides from the period say to bring about 200 pounds of lard, plenty of dried beans, dried fruit, and cornmeal, and of course about 120 pounds of hardtack. Many people
Tea was expensive back then. Alright, fair. But I just love sweet tea, man.
also brought that milk cow as well as chickens for eggs. Now all this food was either
How exactly do you keep a bunch of chickens on track on the Oregon Trail? I'd love to see that.
packed in barrels or more often in provision boxes, which could be stacked and so they wouldn't jostle around too much, and they could be used for chairs and tables, which was really convenient when you had no chairs and tables. Now, since there was no refrigeration, you might think that things like bacon and lard would go bad really quickly. But people would take that and pack it inside of the barrel that had the flour or the cornmeal to keep it away from any sun, and so it would stay for pretty much the entire journey.
Wouldn't that get bacteria on your... Well, I mean, I guess cooking and baking bread and cornbread would kill the bacon bacteria. No alliteration intended. I don't know.
Now, in addition to food, you needed to bring some cooking utensils. This typically meant a frying pan, a Dutch oven, a kettle or coffee pot, tin plates and cups, and maybe a reflector oven, which would bounce the heat off of an open fire to bake cakes and pies. But in general, when it comes to packing, less
The barrels of bacon were kept in the flour barrel.
is more. There was actually one pioneer from the time who had made the trek before, and he is scoffing at those he sees overpacking. They laid in an oversupply of bacon, flour, and beans, and in addition thereto, every conceivable gimcrack and useless article that the wildest fancy could devise, or human ingenuity could invent. Pins and needles, brooms and brushes, ox shoes and horseshoes, lasts and leather, glass beads and hawk's bells, jumping jacks and
Do you remember jacks? Where you threw a ball on these little metal contraptions and tried to catch them?
Jew harps, rings and bracelets, pocket mirrors and pocket books, calico vests and boiled shirts. And much of this stuff would end up abandoned on the side of the trail within the first few weeks.
What boiled shirts? I can't tell if he's being sarcastic, if he's joking or not.
Weeks of travel. Now, the food that you're packing is not, of course, the only food that you're going to have on the journey. People were walking most of the 15 to 20 miles that they traveled each day because being in the wagon was really uncomfortable. It was really bumpy. They didn't have any shocks or anything, so most people were walking, so they were using up a lot of calories. So it was necessary to find extra victuals along the way. And in the early years, there were no shops or trading posts along the trail. But by the 1850s, forts like Fort Kearny and Fort Laramie would have stores where you could top off your provisions or replace anything that might have broken, provided that they had it, and they very often didn't. They were usually just as out of things as you were. But
nice. Good to know that even the stores are out of stuff.
If they did have it, you were probably going to be paying like 5 times as much as you would back in Missouri, because what else are you going to do?
Just like buying milk at
a much less expensive
instead of the grocery store.
Way to get food, if a little more difficult, was to go back to your roots and hunting and gathering. And sometimes that would mean actual roots, things like wild onions and garlic, and something called camas root. The pioneer Phoebe Judson, writing about the American Indians she met, said the camas root, a very nutritious pear-shaped bulb about half the size of an onion, was their chief dependence. It was to them what bread is to us, the staff of life. After steaming the bulbs in a hole in the ground with hot rocks covered with ferns, they were dried. This, with game, was their usual diet. You could also go fishing, provided you knew how and were near a river, and if you didn't know how, you could also do like Phoebe Judson and just trade for some fish. When we reached Salmon Falls on Snake River, the Indians brought some red-meated salmon to the camp. Mr. Judson traded some sugar for a fine, large one, and as it was too late to cook it that night, he dressed it and put it into the water keg under our wagon. We were really so delighted with the prospect of salmon for breakfast that we could not sleep. But the next morning, when they woke up, our beautiful fish was missing, and so was Mr. Bryant's dog. As we never saw him again, he evidently indulged in too much salmon for breakfast and paid the penalty with his life.
Shooting a dog for eating your fish. That's kind of cruel.
As for game meat, on the prairie at least, you had prairie dogs, which were supposedly very, very fatty, but also ducks and rabbits and geese and sage hens. They'd use these hens to make a soup with dumpling that most people seemed to really enjoy, but one woman did not. I think a skunk preferable. Their meat tastes of this abominable mountain sage. Now these were, of course, small little critters, good for maybe one meal, but if you wanted to...
Why is it illegal to hunt geese? They're literally everywhere. You could not... Oh, the dog died from eating the fish? Oh. Anyway, why is it illegal to hunt geese? Just throwing that out there.
To save up some meat, they had big game like antelope and, of course, buffalo. But the thing is, even just a couple buffalo or bison is going to be so much meat that you're not going to be able to eat that all in one sitting, even if you've got several hundred people in the wagon train, so they would have to store it, and usually that meant making it into jerky. They would cut it into strips and then hang it on a rope around the edge of the wagon, and so as they went down the prairie, it would dry in the wind, and one person said it made all of the wagons look like they were decorated with a coarse red fringe. Now, most people really enjoyed the meat of the buffalo, but there is one story about a man who got an old bull, and I guess the meat was not very good. It tasted like the chef d'oeuvre of the devil's kitchen, the most offensive meat I ever tasted, and so that I found it impossible to eat it. But typically, the meat was very much loved. Now, the emigrants on the Oregon Trail rarely had time to stop to get any more buffalo than they could eat or carry. But it was around this time that other people with more sinister intentions were decimating the buffalo population in an effort to destroy the food source of the Plains Indians.
I think this was in attempt to get them dependent on the US government, which, as far as I'm aware, succeeded.
In 1864, near the end of the Oregon Trail era, one emigrant wrote that some of our men went today hunting for buffalo and antelope, but saw none. While the bleached bones of the buffalo are strewn all along the road, not an animal was seen. The needless and wanton slaughter of these once numerous animals has almost caused them to be extinct. The thing is, it wasn't just the meat of the buffalo that both the Plains Indians and the pioneers relied on, it was their poop. See, if you've ever seen the Great Plains, you'll notice there aren't a lot of trees, not a lot of firewood going on. And so they would gather the chips or the poop of the buffalo to start fires. And I guess as long as it's dry, it burns really well and doesn't smell that much. Many of the ladies can be seen roaming over the prairie with sacks in hand, searching for a few buffalo chips to cook their evening meal. Some of the ladies are seen wearing gloves, but most of them have discarded their gloves and are gathering the buffalo chips with their bare hand. And with your dried buffalo poop in hand, it was time to actually get to cooking. And this is where the pioneers they really impress me, because especially in the first part of their journey, where they still had a lot of the ingredients that they were bringing, they were making up some really fancy, complicated foods, if not, maybe not fancy, but complicated foods. They would always have fresh bread that could be risen with either Salertus, which is baking soda, or the newfangled Preston's yeast powder. No excuse for bad bread.
I forgot what I was going to say, never mind.
And should they run out of these, they would make salt rising bread, which is just ingenious. So, you know how like a sourdough starter relies on yeast to build up, to rise the bread? Well, salt rising bread relies on bacteria. Usually the ingredients were just water, salt, flour, and then some cornmeal or dried potato. And it needed to be kept warm all day. So they would make it up and then put that that starter in the front of the wagon where it was warm and the sun was hitting it, and it would start to rise. And then
Townsend's actually did a video on this, I think.
That night they could use it to make fresh bread. Absolutely brilliant. But even more impressive than the bread was the fact that they were making pies and cakes out there. There are letters that talk about fresh-made antelope pot pie and
on bacteria bread. Sorry, I could have been more specific.
Pound cake and peach pie and apple pie, though often the apple pie was made with dried apples, which I guess was not always the best thing, as there was a slogan during the time that said, "Spit in my ears and tell me lies, but give me no dried apple pies." Now the meal that they seemed
Could they not rehydrate it in some water?
to go hog wild for was the 4th of July dinner. Part of it was that it was a big celebration because it's 4th of July, but also it was around the halfway point for many of the emigrants. And so they would kind of splurge and use up a lot of the good things that they still had left. In 1849, William Swain wrote about the midday meal on the 4th of July.
Still sucked. Fair.
Dinner consisted of ham, beans, boiled and baked, biscuits, John cake, apple pie, sweet cake, rice pudding, pickles, vinegar, pepper sauce, and mustard, coffee, sugar, and milk. All enjoyed it well. The boys had raked and scraped together all the brandy they could, and they toasted, hurrayed, and drank till reason was out and brandy was in. I stayed till the 5 regular toasts were drunk, and then, being disgusted with their conduct, I went to our tent, took my pen, and occupied the remainder of the day in writing to my wife. Or at least that's what he told her he did, I'm sure. Now, since this was a time when provisions started to run low, at least the more luxurious provisions, there were, of course, people who had already gone through them. George Keller had a 4th of July dinner on musty hard bread and beef bones in a state of incipient putrefaction.
Gross.
And Amos Steck said that it was just like any other day for him, and he had spent it driving a slow ox team in a sandy road, his eyes filled and his throat choked with it, with no other refreshment than hard bread for dinner, and poor bread at that. He will feel little patriotic.
Poor quality hardtack. Jeez.
Ardor stimulating him even on this great day. Granted, these were the wagon trains that were made up of pretty much just men, because it was the women who did most of the real cooking. As James Hutchings lamented, "I wish I had taken lessons in the art of every man his own washerwoman, cook, and general housewife." But whether or not you could cook didn't really matter when you started to run out of ingredients, which would happen the further down the road you got. All of the little delicacies we brought with us from home were gone, and we had nothing left but flour, bacon, beans, sugar, and tea. And like the children of Israel, my soul loathed this food, and I longed for something fresh. The farther we traveled, the more meager became our fare. This was the time when the pioneers came to rely on things like buffalo jerky, hardtack, and portable soup. This was something where you would boil down.
Portable soup was also gone over by Townsend's.
The meat and bones of an animal so much that it became just this gelatinous kind of layer on the bottom of a pot. And then you would cut that up and let it dry, and you could take that then and later put it into some water and make a soup. It was like a bouillon cube. Then there was something called meat biscuit. 1 pound of it contained the nutriment of 5 pounds of the best fresh beef. It will keep in perfect preservation for any length of time. In tight tin canister or casks, the traveler across the plain can always have a fresh supply of food easily and quickly prepared. Now, the problem with the dwindling food supply was not just that it left everyone rather hangry, but also depressed. Because when you're traveling every single day, all day, it's kind of boring and monotonous, and the only thing people were looking forward to was their next meal. Eating was the best part of the day, even in the harshest conditions. Ate breakfast this morning in a snowstorm, and although the prospect did look rather gloomy, still we kept in good cheer, and our victuals, crusted not with sugar but snow, certainly disappeared in a manner that plain showed that we had not lost our appetites, even if we were experiencing all the delights of a snowstorm in the open prairie. It was also around this time that they started to run out of lemon extract. See, they would often add lemon extract and maybe a little sugar to their water to make a sort of lemonade, because the water did not taste good. It was hard to find any kind of thing resembling clean water at all, but especially out in the prairie, everything was covered in dust. All of their stuff, themselves, their food, and their water just caked in dust. And so they would often add aluminum ammonia sulfate to the water, which would kind of help purify it, but it made it taste absolutely awful. When they didn't have that, they would just put cornmeal into the water and wait like 20 or 30 minutes. And as the cornmeal dropped to the bottom, it would take some of the dirt with them, leaving a little clean-ish water on the top, but still didn't taste great. And with people running out of their luxury items, their food, and sometimes clean water, the Oregon Trail was about to do them real dirty when they came upon Fort Laramie, also dubbed Camp Sacrifice.
Ah, perfect place. I sense nothing. I came across a place called Camp Sacrifice when I was surviving on hardtack, cornmeal, and lard. I'd probably just curl up into a ball.
This was the last major stop before you headed over the Rocky Mountains. And as difficult on the oxen as it's been to drag your butt across the Great Plains, it's going to be even harder for them to drag it up the Rocky Mountains. So you had to get rid of everything that was extra. And I don't mean just like things like books and fine china and things that are kind of not necessary, though they did get rid of those, but in some cases, even things that were necessary if it was deemed too heavy. There was one wagon train who just needed to lighten the load, and so they discarded a ton of bacon, several barrels of bread, 6 dozen steel shovels, axes, hoes, etc., etc., amounting in value to nearly $1,500.
Ah, yes. Just throw away several thousand pounds of your food. I see nothing that could go wrong.
$100. Also, I love how they used to write etc., which was the ampersand C, because the et in etc. literally means and. I just think that's cool. I don't think anybody ever writes that anymore. Now it's just etc. Anyway, one thing that someone had to discard it kind of brings a tear to the eye. A man named Smith had a wooden rolling pin that it was decided was useless and must be abandoned. I shall never forget how that big man stood there with tears streaming down his face as he said, "Do I have to throw it away? It was my mother's. I remember she always used it to roll out her biscuits, and they were awful good biscuits." It's really amazing what these people went through and gave up to start this new life. And I don't just mean giving up their mother's rolling pin, but giving up everything that they had left behind. Many of these people would never again see the family and friends that they had known back east. And I don't think I could have done it.
Neither could I. I love my family, and I'm too lazy to walk hundreds of miles every day. Maybe not hundreds, but...
really don't think I could have lasted very long doing 6 months of hard living, hard traveling, and hard eating. Maybe a week. I think I could have lasted a week. Maybe 2 if these Johnny cakes taste as good as they smell. And here we are. A pioneer breakfast of Johnny cakes and bacon from the Oregon Trail. So sometimes people would have put like honey or syrup or more molasses on these, but I'm gonna just try them, still hot, as is. Here we go. So the texture is a little, it's not dry, it's almost like gritty, but not unpleasantly so, but it's kind of, it's a little grittier than I might like, but the flavor is really, really good. I kind of expected them to be bland, but they're not. It's, you know, it's kind of like cornbread, which cornmeal. It's like cornbread and molasses mixed together, so you kind of get that sweetness, but then the fact that it's like fried basically in bacon grease, that's really nice. And you get a really, really nice bacony flavor to it. It kind of reminds me of like a 19th century version of a McDonald's McGriddle. I actually think that that these are gonna grow on me. This is something I could eat 1 or 2 of them. They're a little, I think it's just that they're a little more dense than like a fluffy pancake because there is nothing in there to raise it. No raising agent, so it's just kind of heavy. But it comes with bacon. The bacon, of course,
really
is it's just bacon, but it's really fatty bacon because that's what they would have had, so I got the fattiest that I could find. And it's really, really good. Also, how cool is this fork? I got it from Townsend's. They have a bunch of really just cool stuff from this period, mostly earlier 18th century, but I thought it fit. Plus, it's just cool looking. So I think these are something that you should try. It's totally worth it. Maybe swap out some of the water for milk, or just kind of play with it. You can add some spice, make the fancier version. But even as is, especially if you're going across the prairie and you're really hungry.
Okay, that's it. We're gonna do a raid.
All the time. They should just get along now. Whoa. Okay, this is very pretty. This is so pretty. Oh, Joe, thank you for the follow. Welcome. James, thank you for joining me. Hello, how was